Let's get started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. We're thrilled that so many have joined to be part of a conversation about creating communities of welcome and how we in this community can be working together to address the refugee crisis. I'm Nazanin Ash. I am privileged to be the CEO of Welcome.us, and I'm being joined today by an incredible group of colleagues, including Elizabeth Lizzie Feudal, as we call her, who is the Private Sponsorship Program Director at the International Refugee Assistance Project, and my Welcome.us colleagues, Kit Taintor, who is our Vice President of Policy and Practice, Rachel Quint, who's our Vice President of Operations and Strategy, and Anya McMurray, who is President and COO of Welcome.us, to share more about the many ways we can partner together to create communities of welcome. We're going to start off with a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a giant group joining today. We're so excited to have almost 140 participants. So we wanted to share a few housekeeping points to make sure our conversation goes smoothly. So one, making sure everyone knows that today's webinar is being recorded. You can submit a question at any time using the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. And then to keep the event a safe environment for all participants, we'll be monitoring for the chat function and ensure that all of the contributions are productive and positive and contributing to the community of welcome that we hope to build together. So we'll start first with a little bit of an overview of the global refugee crisis. What's the problem we're trying to solve together? This last month reached an extremely sobering milestone in global displacement, with now 100 million people globally displaced. That's the highest number ever on record. And contributing to that has been, over 6 million refugees from the crisis in Ukraine added to a global total just in the last few months. And at the same time, recognizing an extraordinary population of globally displaced, over 30 million of whom are refugees displaced in neighboring countries, many of whom rarely have opportunities to live their lives to their fullest potential. I think some of the numbers we know well are the total numbers of globally displaced, but few know that less than 3% of a refugee population ever have a chance to return home, and less than 1% ever have the opportunity to resettle to a new country and rebuild their lives in the safety and security of a new community with opportunities to work and to go to school. But that opportunity to fully resettle and rebuild your life in a third country is one of the most durable and productive solutions for refugees to be able to fully recover and thrive. But we face a global challenge with respect to the number of countries that are willing to share in this responsibility of ensuring that refugees have a safe place to live and an opportunity to fully rebuild. So globally, as noted, less than 1% have an opportunity to be resettled. And the US uniquely ranks quite low with respect to countries resettling refugees and offering safety to refugees. So when you consider, for example, that Poland right now is hosting the equivalent of 10% of its population in refugees, the US has typically resettled far less than even 1% of our total population. And last fiscal year, we accepted less than 12,000 refugees in 2022, ranking us, the United States, in the bottom 20% of countries. But part of what we want to talk about today is the more hopeful news, which is that what we've seen happening in the midst of tremendous crises driven by Afghanistan and then by Ukraine, there have been so many innovations forthcoming that are allowing us to tap into the full capacity and potential of Americans and American institutions to provide welcome and refuge to people in need of safety. And it's an incredibly hopeful opportunity to vastly expand, our country's capacity and willingness to welcome refugees. So Welcome.us was stood up to help enable and inspire and empower and mobilize a much broader range of Americans and American institutions to help welcome newcomers here and help them thrive. We were established in the crucible of the Afghan evacuation crisis, where the US faced the national challenge of resettling close to 80,000 Afghan newcomers in less than 6 months on a resettlement infrastructure that in the previous year, as we shared, had resettled fewer than 12,000 refugees. And what followed next was also the Ukraine crisis, where the US has now committed to admitting at least 100,000 Ukrainians in need of safety. So that means that the US in the span of a year is expecting to admit 20 times the number of refugees that it admitted in the last fiscal year. That's an extraordinary challenge if you're relying only on our government systems and only on what I frequently refer to as our government pipes. So you have resettlement agencies that are doing heroic work, that are facing tremendous capacity constraints as a result of a tremendous decline in refugee resettlement over the last 5 years, and now needing to be on track to admit 20 times the number of the previous year. At Welcome.us, we fundamentally believe that this is a challenge that we can meet if we're engaging a much broader range of Americans and American institutions. And what we want to dive into today is innovations in community sponsorship that are allowing Americans to directly engage in sponsoring refugees and giving them a pathway to safety. And the number I want to share with you so that you have a strong sense of the power and the potential of Americans' capacity and willingness to do this work is that in the 3 months since Uniting for Ukraine was stood up by the US government, which is a program you'll hear more about from my colleagues on the panel, but which allows Americans to directly sponsor Ukrainians in need of safety. In less than 3 months since the program was stood up, over 58,000 Americans have raised their hands to sponsor Ukrainians in need of safety in the United States. And to put that in context, that means Americans have signed up to sponsor more refugees in 3 months than the whole of the United States government admitted in the last 3 fiscal years combined. It's an incredible statement on Americans' willingness to do this work and how many more we can welcome if we tap into that desire to help. With that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kit Taintor to tell us more about the details on Uniting for Ukraine. And we'll also hear from, after Kit, we'll hear from Lizzie to tell us the details of what sponsors need to provide. We hear from Rachel on how you can get involved, and Anya will close us out. But first, turning over to Kit, we know that the US is on track to admit 20 times more refugees this year than it did in 2021. What are the biggest challenges that we face in being able to meet this and being able to safely and productively provide safety to that number of refugees seeking safety here?
Thanks, Naz, and good afternoon, everybody. So glad to see you all on this call. Naz, I really like that you dive in immediately with like, what are all the challenges? But like you, I want to take a step back and recognize all of the great things that have happened over the past couple of months. Like we have welcomed 75,000 Afghan evacuees. And I always like to pause when we think about numbers and recognize that each and every one of those numbers is a story. Each and every one of those numbers is part of a family. Each and every one of those numbers is part of a future that is changed. And while we regret the circumstances that led them to the United States, we also are really celebrate their ability to find a new future here in communities across the United States. So I know that you want to get to the challenges, but I do also want to think about what successes there have been. And resettlement is really hard, and resettlement can be really challenging. But if we look in our rearview mirror, there are other places where we have done really well. So So some of you on the call might remember when we resettled refugees from Bhutan. And what I really like about the story about welcoming refugees from Bhutan is that we were actually able to welcome almost 100% of Bhutanese refugees who wanted to find safety and sanctuary in a country like the United States or a country like Canada. And so just to remark that as we face these challenges, we're facing it from a place in which we are able to really change the lives or the future trajectory of individuals, which is so powerful. And when we do it well, we are really able to create change kind of across a nation, across a people, and across a population. But I mean, Naz, you are right that currently we are faced with a challenge. The needs of individuals does outstrip the ability of our current refugee resettlement system, which is a public-private partnership here in the United States. And, you know, as the system has evolved, it's become a little bit more difficult for everyday Americans like you and I to participate. And newcomers are often shrouded in bureaucracy that distinctly separate them from the communities that could help them thrive. So for instance, I live in Denver, Colorado. I moved here in 2005 and I was moving from Uganda. So I really wanted to engage with the local immigrant community. I was actively seeking that out and I didn't learn about the refugee resettlement program for 5 whole years. So I was a community member that was really, really seeking out ways to engage with newcomers from across the world, but most especially from countries in Africa. And it took me a really long time to even learn in my community that there were refugee resettlement agencies or ways that I could get involved with welcoming. You know, in addition, what's happening, and as you touched on this, is that the 9 resettlement agencies are overwhelmed. You know, if they're serving 10 times the number of arrivals that they served last year, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of stretching of systems. That's a lot of stretching of the abilities of these nonprofits to respond to the needs of these newcomers. And I just want to point out that I think that, you know, what has happened over the last couple of years as well has been our nation facing a pandemic, and resettlement agencies, like all nonprofits, have also had to face sort of the stresses and the challenges that come with working with members of our community during a pandemic. So I always like to point out that, you know, folks are exhausted in resettlement agencies, understandably, still committed, but also really exhausted. And so there's a really good opportunity for us, for Welcome, and for our nation as a whole to sort of meet these challenges with new ideas and innovations that allow people like me, people like many of you on this call today, to participate more directly in welcoming refugees. And by virtue of doing so, increase our capacity to welcome newcomers as a nation and help serve our resettlement agencies and other partners with complementary pathways or complementary services that really help to alleviate some of the stresses and burdens that come their way as we welcome this historic number of individuals arriving during such a challenging time. You know, I do want to reflect, Naz, that, you know, we didn't always depend on the formal refugee resettlement system as it is structured today. So some of you on the call might remember when we resettled Vietnamese refugees after the fall of Saigon. Many of them were welcomed by communities, by churches all across the United States. And so there's innovations if we look towards other countries and ways to welcome in different ways, including by sponsorship. And there is our own historical sort of opportunities to look backwards and figure out what worked well and what could we recreate in the current context to make sure that we are standing up to be the nation of welcomers that we know that we have.
Super helpful, Kit. It's really great to put all of this in historical context and recognize where we've been and where we are and where we can go together. Can you offer the audience now more details on Uniting for Ukraine? As we shared earlier, it was a little over close to 3 months ago that plans were announced to allow Ukrainians to arrive if sponsored by Americans here in the United States. What have we learned from that program so far? And what are the biggest lessons learned from assisting Afghan arrivals prior to Ukrainians that can help as we seek to support Ukrainians arriving now and in the coming weeks and months?
Such a great question, and thanks. So just a quick refresher, Naz mentioned this at the top, but the Uniting for Ukraine is a new program that allows Ukrainians seeking entry to the United States to be sponsored by a US citizen or a permanent resident or other lawfully present individual. It also allows Ukrainians to be sponsored by nonprofits, by employers, by educational institutions. And so it is a little bit different in the ways that we welcomed Afghans. Uniting for Ukraine does require everyday Americans like you and I, businesses, nonprofits to raise their hands and offer safety and sanctuary for a newcomer, for that newcomer to be granted entry into the United States. But as you mentioned, it's really galvanized a whole host of people across the United States to raise their hand in ways that we haven't seen in a long time, to offer refuge to those who have been displaced by Russian aggression. So I do think, that the arrival of 75,000 Afghans in such a short period of time and so recently does allow us to draw some ideas and some solutions from that challenge and from that opportunity. I think most importantly, it allows us to think outside of the box. What is the saying? It's like, it's like urgency or necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. Like when we are faced by these really big challenges, sometimes it really challenges us to think differently, to think bigger, to bring in new partners, to bring in new ways of doing business. And I think that's what excites me, is that we just figured out some really great things to do for Afghans, and we can apply that pretty quickly in the ways that we welcome newcomer Ukrainians. So to give a couple of examples, to tap into the tremendous capacity of American institutions and the American people, over the past 9 months, we've worked to really make it possible for organizations or informal groups of 5 or more individuals to sponsor Afghan newcomers by partnering with a nonprofit or by independently forming their own sponsor circles. And this really helped to rapidly scale within the system the ability to move Afghans from military bases, which we also called safe havens, into their new communities. And as an example, our partner, the Community Sponsorship Hub, has taken that model of sponsor circles and decided to welcome Ukrainians through that same model. So that's a good example of something that we recently did to make sure that we were welcoming Afghans successfully in local communities, and that we can reapply to welcome Ukrainians in the same way. I also want to point out that we were able to broker a lot of new partnerships: Team Rubicon, Islamic Relief USA, Lions Club International, and now additional faith and partner organizations across the United States, who again have really stood up and said that they want to be a part of it. And we've managed to figure out ways that they can play a deeper engagement with newcomers, to include not only the Afghans, but also the Ukrainians. So in short, Naz, I think we've got a lot of lessons learned. We've got a lot of best practices, and most importantly, we've got a lot of innovations that we know we can apply to ensure that Ukrainians find success here in the United States.
Excellent. And before I turn to Lizzie, tell us a little bit about how Uniting for Ukraine has been going. Applications received, process, what are processing times looking like? What's that experiencing? What does that experience under Uniting for Ukraine look like?
Get ready for some rapid fire numbers. 58,126 applications have been submitted on behalf of sponsors across the United States for Ukrainian beneficiaries. Over 35,000 newcomers have been approved for travel, which means that they will be on our shores imminently. We've got 13,000 folks that have already arrived in the United States. Our Ukraine hub, which is a pretty central location to find up-to-date information, has seen more than 6,000 welcomers sign up to want to figure out how they connect with the beneficiary overseas to provide them the refuge here in the United States. And then I think what is my favorite thing about Uniting for Ukraine, Naz, is the fact that it's been going pretty swiftly, and that it is a good example of, the process working smoothly, efficiently, streamlined, and elegantly. So just as an example of this, when sponsors are putting in applications, they are seeing their applications for the beneficiaries that they're planning to welcome be approved in a matter of days. So again, a lot of good successes here, a lot of things to celebrate, but as you mentioned before, a lot of challenges that we still face in order to do well by the newcomers that begin to call America home.
That's right. But just as you said, with necessity being the mother of invention, our great hope is that by demonstrating this program of sponsorship for Ukrainians and a rapid process for being able to bring them to safety, we'll be modeling an approach together that we can expand to other populations in need. And, going back to those original data points, vastly expanding America's capacity to welcome. And again, Kit, appreciating deeply that you put the sponsorship that's happening today in historical context. And that's where I'm going to turn next to Lizzie. Uniting for Ukraine was announced in April, but the concept of private sponsorship isn't new. And you and your colleagues at the International Refugee Assistance Project have been advocating for it for a long while. And you've seen how the program has succeeded in other countries, including our neighbor just north of the border in Canada. So we'd love to hear from you the background on private sponsorship and how it's worked for communities before Uniting for Ukraine.
Absolutely. Thank you, Naz. So I think the first interesting thing to note is that private sponsorship and community sponsorship are not only not new in the sense that they've been utilized quite a bit in other countries, but they've actually existed before in the United States. So I think someone earlier referenced, in previous refugee crises decades ago, the United States actually had its own private sponsorship program, and it's quite pioneering in that regard. Primarily during the Reagan years, but lasting into the early 90s, the United States had its own private sponsorship program. Alongside that, we saw a private sponsorship program develop in Canada, where groups of individuals or organizations can either be matched with someone or choose to name or nominate a particular refugee or refugee family to be resettled, and do fundraising and preparation to be able to support them on their arrival and welcome them into their communities. In the last several years, particularly since the Syrian refugee crisis began, we've seen a proliferation of different types of private sponsorship and community sponsorship programs around the globe. So a number of countries on a number of different continents have explored how they can adapt sponsorship programs to their particular countries' political systems, immigration systems, economic systems, figuring out, how you can take this concept of allowing communities in your country to really directly engage in welcoming newcomers and adapt it to what your local conditions are, which is part of the beauty of a sponsorship program, that you kind of have that space for innovation, ingenuity. So in the United States, for several years now, IRAP and some other organizations have been advocating for increased use of sponsorship in the United States and the creation of a full private sponsorship program here. I'll make a distinction because it gets quite confusing even for those of us who work on it. Community sponsorship is generally understood as kind of an umbrella term under which a lot of different types of sponsorship of refugees and newcomers can fall. Private sponsorship tends to refer to a sponsorship in which the sponsors are taking on pretty much all of the responsibilities for the newcomers' welcome. And then there are other forms of sponsorship in which the sponsors may take on a shared responsibility. They might take on responsibility in partnership with a resettlement agency. They might take on responsibility for, someone who's been displaced but isn't a refugee. So there are a number of forms, and it gets a little bit confusing. But I think the crux of it is that community sponsorship utilizes the U.S. government's existing legal authority under the 1980 Refugee Act to draw on the financial, social, logistical, et cetera, resources of communities around the country in welcoming refugees, and therefore, increasing the system's capacity overall. So I think that we've seen a significant increase in the use of co-sponsorship, which is one form of community sponsorship, of partnerships between sponsor groups and resettlement agency local offices in the past few years. And now, of course, with the Afghan parolees and the Afghan Sponsor Circle program, and then Ukrainian parolees and the Uniting for Ukraine program, we're seeing really ramped up use of different forms of sponsorship to increase the capacity of our our welcoming system at a time when that system is still, rebuilding itself a bit after a few years of having very few arrivals due to both the Trump administration's, positions on, on the admissions numbers and COVID delaying travel.
Lizzie, just to pull the thread on where you ended, how would you describe the potential impact of scaled private sponsorship for the refugee resettlement system? What's it going to allow us to do that we haven't been able to do in the last several decades?
Well, I think in addition to just enabling greater numbers, enabling the United States to welcome more people, I think it also will allow us to tap into communities across the country that we haven't really been able to tap into before. There are resettlement agency offices all over the country that do incredible work, but they can't be literally everywhere. We're a very large country with an enormous diversity, in the communities that we have. And I think that, enabling groups and organizations outside of the traditional system to also take on some of these responsibilities allows us to get that involvement in these places, and it taps into new employment possibilities, new housing, in addition to just, new financial and social resources. And then I would also add that I think, on the flip side, it's allowing those communities to take on this really incredible role. Allowing more Americans and more communities to engage in this, in my mind, is a way for us to transform, the narrative around refugee resettlement and welcoming newcomers. It's a way for our communities to really, hopefully, finally kind of own this process that, that we are a country of welcome, down, from the federal down to the very local level.
And thinking about what Kit said, that so many in our communities want to help and want those opportunities to help, and sponsorship provides that pathway. And it's so much about why I frequently refer to welcome.us as welcome.us, because it is as much about us and our communities and our great desire to help as it is about the people we seek to welcome here, and giving people that opportunity to be who they are, to be great neighbors, to welcome somebody new in their community, be a navigator, be a guide, and help them rebuild when they've so often had to leave everything behind, including their social networks and their family and their friends. Refugees and vulnerable newcomers need so much of what nonprofits and resettlement agencies provide. They need housing, they need household supplies, they need help finding a job, but they also just so much need a friend and a friendly face and someone to help them feel like they're included and they belong and that they're welcome here. And that's what community sponsorship can do so uniquely. So a last question for you, Lizzie. Could you talk a little bit about what are the important things that potential sponsors should consider when they're deciding whether sponsorship is the right thing for them to take on as an act of welcome? And then can you talk a little bit about the legal status that newcomers under Uniting for Ukraine have when they arrive here, and what resources can be available to sponsors to help them navigate what can sometimes be a very complex legal process?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, the big question to think about is, what level of support you think you might be able to provide for how long, and how you might involve your community in the sponsorship process. So there are a lot of different and very important ways that you can step up and, and support new arrivals. Sponsorship is one way. It's a very robust way. So I think, looking into how can I engage others in my community in this process, keeping in mind that it's not just, you alone filling out this form and, and applying to, to bring a Ukrainian individual or family here, but ideally also you in a group. You in a group that might come from, your neighbors, your faith community, any kind of community that you're a part of, organization that you're a part of. So thinking about what does that look like? What resources does that bring to the table? What capacity? How could we work together to do this? And, what commitment can we make in light of that is, I think, a big question to ask yourself. And then in terms of status, those who are coming through the Uniting for Ukraine program are humanitarian parolees, which is a temporary form of status, a little different than the standard refugee status. That allows those folks to come for urgent humanitarian reasons and to stay in the United States for a period of 2 years. Now, it's possible that Congress will, act to offer some adjustment of status possibility for the folks who are coming through this program. But ultimately, the biggest possibility that we know of right now, if folks need to stay beyond the 2-year period, is going to be the asylum process. So applying for asylum once someone has arrived here, which is a complex process, but there are resources available. And for both Uniting for Ukraine applications, if you want to be a sponsor and apply for the program, as well as, for the asylum process, there are quite a lot of resources available online, a lot of guidance, and sometimes the ability to enlist the help of, legal clinics and lawyers to walk you through that. So I would definitely note that on the welcome.us website, there is quite a detailed guide on filing the paperwork as a sponsor, what to expect, how to fill it out, how to demonstrate your ability to sponsor, that you can access. And then, in addition to that, for more individualized assistance, and then also looking at the asylum side of things, there are a lot of compilations online of places you can look for free or low cost legal resources. I would certainly look at the welcome.us website, as well as searching for legal clinics in your area, legal assistance, which is often provided by universities with law schools, by local governments, etc.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Super helpful to have your deep expertise and historical context for our conversation today. And that was a great way to transition to Rachel next, who's going to show us the new Welcome Connect platform, which is going to allow sponsors who are eager to engage in this work to connect with Ukrainians in need of safety. I think in a really tremendous demonstration of how Americans and American institutions are so eager to do this work. Welcome.us launched this initiative to mobilize Americans, help educate them about Uniting for Ukraine, and make it easy for them to learn about sponsorship and to sign up to be a sponsor, have the training they need, with the great support of a range of private sector institutions, including Goldman Sachs and a variety of tech partners who have partnered to create the very first matching tool where sponsors can be connected with newcomers in need of safety. And it's a platform which launched just today. And it was launched because, as Kit mentioned, we had over 6,000 Americans who were already signed up to do this work, but needed a way to be able to connect with Ukrainians in need of safety. And similarly, many Ukrainians who were coming to us and partner organizations organically, seeking the support of a sponsor. So we're super excited to share Welcome Connect, which launched today. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to share this platform with all of you, and I think it will answer some of the questions that I'm seeing come in the Q&A. First, just want to acknowledge the partners that help make this happen. So as Naz mentioned, leadership from Goldman Sachs, as well as a lot of support from ServiceNow, Infosys, and Gibson Dunn. So a lot of recognition to them. I'm going to quickly share my screen. Let's see if I can successfully do this. And hopefully make that full screen as well. Can you see that? Great. So just wanted to first highlight that this platform is really intended to align with 4 key principles. So the first one is beneficiary choice. It's really important. All of the Ukrainians that we are working with are in extremely vulnerable situations. And so really just wanting to make sure that we're providing as much agency as possible. Number two is support for sponsors. So we want sponsors to have access to support to make sure that sponsors are going to be successful. Inclusion, so trying to bring in new folks who are excited to sponsor, and also make sure that all kinds of Ukrainians have access to sponsorship if they're interested. And then, of course, data security and privacy, since this is an online platform. The purpose of the platform is really to connect interested sponsors, so folks like many of you, to Ukrainians who are looking for a sponsor and who are looking to come to the United States. So I'm just going to actually do a quick demo of the platform itself. So if you go to today, if you go to Welcome Connect, which is connect.welcome.us, it will reload to this. It's available. This page is available in English and Ukrainian. You'll see that there are two buttons, one for Ukrainians coming soon, but then one for people who are interested in being sponsors. If you click on this, it will bring you, let's see if I can, it will bring you to, that is not true. It will bring you to a page that looks like this, where you would register for an account with Welcome Connect. This will allow you to sign up and to get into the pool of potential sponsors. I realize now that it unsigned me out since last time while we were preparing, so apologies. When you log in, when you register rather, it will bring you to a page that looks like this, provides you some of the information about how the platform works. Would link you to an online training. So I'm going to click here to demonstrate what that looks like, which provides a lot of information about how to be a successful sponsor, what is sponsorship, what's required. So you can see kind of a click through of these trainings. And then you start by creating a profile about what you're, sort of who you are, what you're interested in terms of support, and telling the beneficiary, the Ukrainian, a bit about yourself. That is what the platform is, what is available right now. So that's launched today, a couple hours ago. Starting next Wednesday, the same process will be available for Ukrainians, and the site will be available fully translated into Ukrainian. So we'll be inviting interested Ukrainians to also create profiles and to register starting next week. And then within a couple of weeks, we're planning by mid-July, the platform will be open for beneficiaries, for Ukrainians, to start looking through potential sponsors who meet the criteria that they've put in their profile, and they'll be allowed to reach out to a small set of potential sponsors. They'll be able to message back and forth on the platform to determine if that's the right fit. And then we'll be provided with a bunch of information about how to move on to the US, the Uniting for Ukraine application program. The last thing I'll just say is that in the spirit of the beneficiary choice, beneficiaries will be able to look through a set of sponsors that meet their criteria, but sponsors will only be able to see the profile of Ukrainians once a Ukrainian has reached out to them. And so that is really trying to provide some choice to the Ukrainians who, again, as I mentioned, are in a really vulnerable situation and may have some visions for their future that they're really trying to pursue. And so trying to enable that. I'm happy to answer other questions, but really just excited for folks to go on to connect.welcome.us and start the process of creating a profile there.
Rachel, can you share with our audience how many sponsors have signed up, just in the initial launch?
Yeah, so it's been about an hour and a half since it launched, and I think we have just under 100 sponsors who have already started creating their accounts and their profiles. Obviously, we need many, many more in the days to come, but just really excited that there is enthusiasm already.
Amazing. And then Rachel, before I move on to our last speaker, I wondered if you could quickly share the story of the engineers who really came together to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely embarrass them if they're on the line watching this. But really just, it's been an incredible multicultural, multi-nationality effort. The two men who are leading the effort from Goldman Sachs, from the engineering team, one of them is a Ukrainian American guy who came to the US when he was 8 years old. And so obviously has a very personal connection. And his partner in this work, the other co-lead, is actually Russian American, was a refugee who resettled in the United States in 95, was resettled, his family was resettled by HIAS, the resettlement agency, and his wife is Ukrainian, and so has also expressed just a ton of personal connection to this. So those have been our leaders on this work, plus folks across dozens of time zones and nationalities and backgrounds who have just dedicated hours and many sleepless nights to making this a effective and secure platform.
I think it's such a beautiful American story and such a beautiful demonstration of how, if we take it to citizens, if we take it to our communities, if we take it to our institutions, they're always going to say yes to finding a way to welcome people in need of refuge. It's really, really beautiful. All right. Well, for many of you on the call, thank you, Rachel. For so many of you on the call.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say it's actually almost 125. I got an updated number.
Wow.
So they're ticking, the numbers are ticking up by the minute.
Basically a sponsor a minute. I think it's really amazing. So it's really encouraging. And thank you so much to all our partners who have helped make this happen, and to all of you who joined this webinar because you're interested in sponsoring. For those of you for whom sponsorship might not be the right first next step, but who have a great desire to help in other ways, I'm seeing so many of the questions come through on our Q&A about all of your desire to help. I wanted to ask Anya to step in and tell our audience about other ways that they can help newcomers being resettled here.
Sure. Thank you, Naz. So I just wanted to reiterate that we were founded after the fall of Kabul to really help capture the outpouring of goodwill that we saw unfurl across the country. There were so many people who wanted to help but it just wasn't always clear how to do that. And we know that remains the case today. We are working really hard to help identify those pathways in. And so I wanted to lay out what a few of them are today. Sponsorship is certainly one of them, but there are many other easier, perhaps, ways to engage that you could do right now. And I'll also say we are really continuing to refine these because we know it can be difficult to find your way in, but I want you to know that it's worth the effort. The impact that it can have on both your life and the life of the family that you're touching and helping it's really remarkable. So a few of the ways that you could get off this phone and help are to go to the Welcome Fund, which is a partnership we have with GoFundMe that ensures that 100% of the dollars that are raised are dispersed to local, regional, and national organizations that are supporting refugees right now. They're doing that work both in the initial arrival of newcomers in the community and also in that longer term integration into life in the US. We know that work takes time. And while many Afghans have now found their way, most Afghans have now found their way into their home communities, there is so much work that remains. And we will see that work emerge again with Ukrainians as they arrive and with the many, many other refugee and newcomer populations that America is proud to host, to sponsor, and to really accept for the long run and to be future Americans. Just a note on the Welcome Fund and its impact. Since it was established this fall, nearly $15 million has been distributed, and it's making it easier for newcomers to navigate their new communities, find housing, get that first job, get kids in school, and all the other countless things that are needed to get your life started in a new place. Another way that you can help is if you happen to have a home that you rent out on Airbnb, you can offer it through our partnership with Airbnb. Housing remains a top challenge for newcomers when they arrive in the United States. And you can find out more information about that opportunity on our website. If you're an attorney or a legal professional or a law student, we really need your help in providing pro bono services to Afghans who are seeking asylum. They need to file their asylum application. And you can find out more information about how to do that through our partnership with We the Action on a project called Welcome Legal Alliance. And we're doing that in deep partnership also with Gibson Dunn, a major national law firm that's providing significant additional support, as well as Human Rights First and several other organizations that have proven to just be amazing partners. Finally, on our website, you can also find organizations that are in your community right now, helping newcomers every day. There are so many organizations all over the country that are doing this important work, and they have been doing it for a long time, and they need your help, whether that's in the form of donations or volunteering your time. If you go to our website, welcome.us, we have it really clearly delineated in terms of the types of ways you can get involved, whether you have a business, whether you're a volunteer looking for opportunities, or whether you're interested in making a donation. All of those opportunities are right there. We are very excited to get feedback when we can on how to do this better. So consider this an invitation for an exchange, and we look forward to making these pathways easier yet as we go forward. I'm going to turn it back to you, Naz.
Thank you so much, Anya. That was super helpful. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. There are a wide variety of questions that I'm eager to get to in the time we have left. I'm gonna answer just a few off the top, that I'm seeing repeated among the questions here. One, many of you, I hope, will have had your questions answered about how you can connect with a Ukrainian in need of safety through the Welcome Connect platform. Two, if you've already created, only one individual, if you're intending to sponsor with a group or with family members, only one of you needs to create a profile, and you can indicate in the profile, the group that you'll be working with that will help in the sponsorship. So for example, you can say that you and a group of 5 friends, or you and your, X number of family members, or you and your church, or you and your other community organization are joining together to help provide safety to a family. So just answering those few quick ones. Rachel, I wonder if I can turn to you to answer some of the questions that are coming up about translation. Will potential sponsors need to translate their applications for beneficiaries to view them? How will that work?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think at this point we are planning that there will be dynamic translation embedded into the platform. So for all conversations that are happening on the platform, there will be a way to translate live back and forth without having to leave the platform. Whether if folks are having conversations in message and they decide that they want to have a conversation outside of the platform through phone or video chat or whatever, obviously we can't support that. But at this time, we are hoping that translation will be part of the platform.
Excellent. And then I'm seeing questions about whether this kind of platform would be expanded to other populations. We're so eager for that to happen. So right now, this type of sponsorship opportunity is something the United States government has created uniquely for Ukrainians in need of safety. But our great hope is that by demonstrating the tremendous capacity of Americans and their willingness to the sponsors, and by ensuring, as many of you have also flagged in the Q&A, that beneficiaries have the support they need to resettle safely and well in their new communities, that this is a program and a method of welcoming newcomers that we can expand to other populations. So Rachel, I wonder too, if you can answer questions related to how sponsors and beneficiaries will be connected. How will you be, how will the Welcome Connect platform, tee up potential sponsors for beneficiaries to view?
Absolutely. And I think the question specifically was about whether there was an algorithm that's doing that. As I mentioned on the top, really one of the principles that we wanted to design with in mind is about beneficiary choice. And so that does mean that beneficiaries will be able to look through a wide selection of potential sponsors. Those sponsors will be filtered to make sure that they fit the criteria. So for example, if a sponsor says that they are willing to sponsor a family up to 4 people, and someone says that they have 5 people or 6 people in their family, then those people would not see one another. Or if there are certain cities, or rather states, that a particular Ukrainian is interested in, they may only see those sponsors that are in those states. But with the concerns around algorithmic bias and making sure that we're really providing as much choice as possible to the beneficiaries, we are not narrowing further through algorithm. I also saw a question in the chat, if it's okay, Naz, for me to answer, about if someone wants to sponsor in a group, do they need to wait to use the Welcome Connect? What's that?
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think that I would say that you definitely don't need to wait. I think you could definitely create a profile now and use the platform and just indicate that you, in that section that Naz mentioned, that you are working on putting together a group. We understand that people are generally much more successful when they have support from their communities, but that's not a requirement of using Welcome Connect.
Yes. And then Kit, I'm going to turn to you because there are a number of questions about the support in communities that are available to sponsors and beneficiaries, including with respect to medical benefits, including with respect to needs that may arise while, once they arrive. Can you talk a little bit about both the federal and welcome.us resources that are available to sponsors and beneficiaries?
Great. Since we're short on time, I do want to make sure that folks understand that we've got a number of resources on our Ukraine Hub, as we are kind of colloquial calling it. You'll see that web address in your chat. But if you go on the resources tab and scroll down, you'll see a whole host of different materials, one of which is called Guidance to Connecting to Local and State Resources. So it does have a whole lot of information about different things or different paths you might walk down as a sponsor to determine what health insurance options are available to you, how you might go about enrolling an English language learner child or youth or student into schools come this summer and this fall. So just note, it's pretty comprehensive to help direct you to different places or different organizations that may be able to help you make sure that your beneficiary is connected to services. And Naz, I think one of the things that I really want to make sure our audience understands is that even though Ukrainians are coming in under an immigration status called humanitarian parole, there was an act of Congress that allows these beneficiaries underneath Uniting for Ukraine to access refugee services and a whole host of other federal benefits. And so I know that for many of us, health insurance is always top of mind, right? It's so complex, it's so confusing, it can get so expensive. So I do want to acknowledge that individuals coming in under Uniting for Ukraine are eligible for public health or public insurance plans such as Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Plan, as well as for all of the plans that might be on the Affordable Care Act's Health Exchange Marketplace. So know that there's a whole host of health insurance opportunities that people might be able to tap into, whether those are low cost like Medicaid or whether or not they are those sorts of plans that are on the health exchange. But we do feel confident that by navigating through your local partners, to include potentially refugee resettlement agencies, but also to include health access and health affordability nonprofits or a local community health center, that you can become attached to many of those benefits. So again, there is a whole host of benefits that are available to the beneficiaries, everything from health insurance to food assistance to help with kind of cultivating a good resume, enrolling in English classes, and finding a job ultimately once that work authorization is approved. So again, we're very excited that this whole host of benefits has been brought to bear because we know when we invest in newcomers that our whole community really thrives.
Okay, and recognizing the limited time we have, I'll do one more question, but also wonder if the team can post in the chat an email where people can send questions that we may not have had a chance to answer. But again, reinforcing that many of your questions can be answered with the Q&A on the Ukraine Hub at whatukraine.welcome.us. So I'm going to ask you, Kit, again to take on a couple questions, related questions that have appeared in the chat around who can sponsor and whether they need to be co-located with the family that they are supporting, around the pacing of approvals for applications. So once you've submitted your application, how long will it potentially take to see that approval process happen and travel authorized? And then a really important question around, if 6,000 people have already been admitted, if 58,000 applications have already been received, will there still be opportunities to sponsor, a month or two from now?
Thanks, Naz. That was a lot. So I'm going to try my best to get through that. But noting,
for sure.
Yeah, that President Biden, the administration set a goal of welcoming 100,000 beneficiaries under Uniting for Ukraine, but it's just a goal. It's not a cap. And so as Naz mentioned before, we're really excited for the opportunity to show the welcoming and innovation that exists within each of us and with each of our communities, and acknowledge the fact that we could welcome 120,000 Ukrainians. We could welcome 150,000 Ukrainians. And so we really know that there are over 10 million Ukrainians that have been forced through their homes. And so we're hoping that we are able to not only to meet President Biden's goal, but to exceed it. Again, those applications are being processed within days, which is really quick. And you don't need to be part of a group or to have somebody live in your house in order to be a sponsor. So note that each sponsor beneficiary relationship is going to be a little bit different. We've seen beneficiaries that are coming to the United States who are working remotely, potentially with companies in Europe, and are just looking for a safe haven for their kids and for their families. And we've seen other folks that are going to need a little bit of extra help because they're going to need to seek employment in order to have earned income over the long term. So that's why we're really excited about the platform Welcome Connect, because it does allow people to sort of negotiate those needs and those strengths of both the beneficiary and the sponsor to make sure that people are set up for success, whether you're a sponsor or whether you're a beneficiary and moving forward. So I think that I hit most of those questions, Naz, but just sort of reflecting that, a lot of our FAQs on our website does cover a lot of this information. We were so fortunate to be able to work with partners and folks like you to make sure that our FAQs are relevant. And so I really invite you to go on in that, but maybe before you send that email and just make sure that we've been able to answer your questions on our website.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. And huge, huge thanks to all of our participants today. We're so excited to share this opportunity with you and really eager for all of you to get engaged in any way that feels right for you. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you joining today.